James Whitaker thought he knew his wife, Laura, better than anyone, until the night he was nearly killed in what seemed like a random home invasion. But when detectives uncovered a trail of messages, payments, and a dark motive buried months before the attack, they realized the truth. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was a cold, calculated betrayal, and Laura had orchestrated it all. James Whitmore always believed that the worst days in life arrived with warning signs, missed calls, strange gut feelings, or a bad dream that lingers too long after waking. But on the night of April 16th, everything seemed normal. He wrapped up his shift as a night nurse at St. Vincent's Medical Center and stopped for gas on the way home, just as he always did. The streets were quiet, the sky overcast, and the neighborhood he lived in, Maple Glen, seemed as peaceful as ever. He pulled into his driveway just past midnight. The porch light was off, which was strange. Laura always left it on when he worked. Late. At first he assumed she had simply fallen asleep and forgotten. But as he walked up the steps, something else made his stomach tighten. The front door was slightly open. Not wide enough to look broken into, but just ajar. Enough to raise suspicion. James called out her name. No answer. His voice echoed down the empty hallway. The house was dark, except for the faint blue glow of the kitchen light in the distance. That's when he noticed the mess. The hallway rug was bunched up like someone had tripped over it. A vase that normally sat on the table near the entryway was shattered, its pieces scattered across the hardwood floor. Drawers from the console table were pulled open and emptied. There was a cushion lying in the middle of the living room, and a picture frame, a wedding photo, face down on the ground. He stepped carefully, his heart pounding louder with every move. As he entered the living room, the damage became clearer. Furniture was knocked over. Chairs lay on their sides. Lamps were broken. It looked like someone had ransacked the house, but not methodically. More like someone was creating chaos rather than searching for something specific. His first thought was a burglary gone wrong. Maybe they got spooked and fled before they could take anything. But then he noticed something odd. Nothing seemed to be missing. His laptop still sat on the coffee table. The TV was untouched. Laura's designer handbag was on the floor, open, but not looted. Her wallet and phone were inside. He rushed upstairs, dread building inside him. That's when he found her, Laura, slumped against the wall at the top of the staircase. Blood was smeared across her blouse, a trail of it leading from the bedroom. She was conscious but visibly shaken. Her eyes were wide and her breathing shallow. A knife lay on the floor just a few feet away from her, its blade stained. Paramedics arrived within minutes. Laura was rushed to the hospital. She had a shallow stab wound to her side and a cut on her arm. The injuries weren't life-threatening, but serious enough to require stitches. At the hospital, between gasps of breath, she told the officers what had happened. According to her, she'd been watching TV when she heard a sound from the backyard. Thinking it was just the wind, she ignored it. But minutes later, a masked man appeared in the living room. He was dressed in black and carrying a knife. He didn't say a word. He lunged at her and she fought back. She claimed she managed to escape to the stairs, but he caught her, stabbed her once, and tried to silence her. Something must have scared him off, she said. Maybe the sound of James. Pulling into the driveway, police began their investigation that night. They examined the scene, dusted for prints, and looked for signs of forced entry. There were none. All the windows were locked. The front and back doors showed no damage. No broken locks, no pry marks. It didn't add up. despite the lack of forced entry. The police tentatively labeled it a burglary turned violent. There had been a rash of property crimes in nearby neighborhoods, car break-ins, package thefts, petty vandalism. Perhaps this was the same perpetrator escalating. James, though, couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He kept going over it in his head. The disorganized mess, the untouched valuables, the fact that Laura had been injured, but not fatally. It felt theatrical, like someone had created a scene meant to mimic a crime. And yet the injuries were real. The blood was real. Laura's fear had seemed real too. As days passed, Laura recovered physically but grew more withdrawn. She insisted on installing new locks and a security system. She wouldn't stay in the house alone. James supported her, trying to be understanding. Trauma, he knew, manifested in different ways. Still, the uncertainty gnawed at him. The police, after a few weeks of looking, had no leads, no fingerprints, matched anyone in the system. No witnesses saw anything unusual that night. No surveillance cameras on their street picked up a suspect. The case began to lose momentum. Officers stopped calling with updates. It was gradually shelved as a cold case. A random act of violence, they said, and not much else to do without new information. James tried to move on, but the fear lingered. Not the fear of a masked man returning, but a different kind. A quiet, unsettling fear that the truth was still hiding in plain sight. Every time he walked past the blood-stained hallway where he found Laura, he felt a chill. Every time he looked at the untouched valuables, he asked himself why a burglar would leave behind the very things they came to steal. In the back of his mind, a question he didn't want to ask began forming. What if it wasn't random? What if the person who did this knew Laura? What if someone let them in? James started paying closer attention to small details. He checked their home for anything unusual: broken locks, missing keys, signs someone had copied the code to their garage keypad. Nothing obvious turned up. Still, he couldn't let it go. Then, 2 weeks after the attack, he remembered the old security camera he had installed in their garage months ago. It was something he had done after his car was broken into once. A small motion-activated camera tucked above the entrance, feeding footage to a backup drive. He hadn't checked it in weeks. Maybe it caught something, and that's when everything began to unravel. James sat alone in his garage late into the night, hunched over an old laptop that barely powered on. The garage light buzzed overhead as the footage slowly loaded. He hadn't touched the backup hard drive in weeks, not since the night Laura had been attacked. Part of him doubted it would show anything useful. The camera faced the driveway, and the incident had supposedly occurred inside the house. But a lingering instinct told him to look anyway. He scrolled through hours of footage, watching squirrels dart across the driveway, neighbors walking their dogs, and the occasional passing car. For most of the day in question, there was nothing unusual. The garage door opened and closed once in the morning when Laura left for errands. Later she returned with grocery bags and went inside. Then the camera went still. Nothing of interest for hours. But as the timeline approached midnight, something finally changed. At exactly 11:47 p.m., a dark figure appeared on the edge of the frame. James leaned in, pausing the video. The man wore a dark hoodie and jeans. His face was partially obscured by the hood, but he didn't look like someone sneaking around. He walked with a steady, confident pace straight down the driveway. James pressed play again, watching as the man paused at the edge of the garage. He pulled out his phone, checked. Something, then looked directly at the side gate leading to the backyard. Without hesitation, he walked through it and out of view. James felt his stomach drop. There was no confusion in the man's movements, no hesitation. He knew exactly where to go. That gate led to the back door of the house, a door with a keypad. Lock. James had changed the code recently, just a few months back. Only he and Laura knew the new code. There was no sign of forced entry anywhere in the house that night. No broken locks, no open windows. That had always bothered him, and now he was beginning to understand why. Whoever this man was, he didn't break in. He was let in, or he had the code. James rewound the footage and watched the scene again, this time paying attention to every movement. The way the man checked his phone, the confident stride, the gate creaking open just slightly before he slipped through. It didn't look like a burglary. It looked like an appointment. The next morning, James brought the footage to the police. For the first time since the investigation began, they had something tangible. A possible suspect on video. Detectives took the footage and promised to analyze it frame by frame. James went home, unsure of what to feel. A part of him felt vindicated. His instincts had been right. But another part of him felt something, colder settling in his chest. If the man had the code, then the attack wasn't random. That meant someone had given it to him. The days that followed moved quickly. Investigators began digging deeper, no longer treating the incident as a botched robbery. They checked phone records, reviewed Laura's call logs, searched her emails. Nothing immediately obvious stood out, but one officer decided to take a closer look at Laura's financial activity. That's when more questions began to surface. Over the previous 6 months, Laura had made a series of cash withdrawals, nothing too large, but frequent. A few $100s here, another $500 there, spread across different ATMs. James had never noticed it before because the withdrawals didn't trigger any alerts, and they came from an account Laura managed on her own. But when compiled into a single list, the pattern was hard to ignore. Thousands of dollars in cash had vanished over time. Investigators also uncovered something even more troubling. Laura had been using a secondary phone number, registered under a prepaid plan. The phone itself wasn't in the house, but the number had shown up repeatedly in text logs from James's carrier records. She had messaged someone nearly every day for 2 months, short messages, often in the evening or late at night. They subpoenaed the records and traced the number to a man named Marcus Bell, a 37-year-old living just outside Denver. Marcus had a criminal record that included assault, drug possession, and a charge for attempted robbery nearly 10 years ago. He had served time and kept a low profile since, but his name raised immediate red flags. When officers questioned him, Marcus denied knowing anyone named Laura, but when confronted with phone records, he changed his story. He claimed he had met her through an online forum and that she had paid him for a favor. At first, he was vague, but under pressure, he admitted that Laura had paid him to break into her house. Not to steal, not to scare her, but to make it look like a violent crime had taken place, something serious enough to draw sympathy, maybe even insurance money. That was the original story, according to Marcus. But then his version shifted again. He said Laura had offered him more money if he could make it look like her husband was the target. When detectives asked him what that meant, Marcus hesitated. Eventually, he confessed. The original plan wasn't just to stage a robbery. It was to kill James. James sat in silence when detectives told him the news. The idea was too horrifying to fully process. His wife, the woman he had trusted, cared for, built a life with, had orchestrated an attack designed to end his life. And all of it had been hidden beneath the mask of a random crime. As police built their case, they collected more evidence. Bank transactions, text message logs, Marcus's testimony. The footage from the garage camera became a crucial piece. Clear, proof that the man hadn't just stumbled onto their property. He had been there with purpose, likely after receiving instructions from Laura herself. James's world began to unravel. Everything he had believed about his marriage started to feel like a lie. He began to remember strange details, nights when Laura stayed up late texting, unexplained absences, mysterious withdrawals. Things that once seemed innocent now took on a sinister hue. The story that began as a simple home invasion had transformed into something far darker. And it was only the beginning. There were still questions left unanswered. Why Laura had done it, how long she had been planning it, and whether there were others involved. The answers would come soon enough. But the truth was already clear. James had never been the victim of a random break-in. He had been the target of a cold, calculated betrayal by the person he thought he knew best. The investigation shifted gears the moment Marcus Bell's confession was on record. Detectives now had a motive, a suspect, and a cooperating witness. But they still needed concrete proof that Laura Whitmore had orchestrated the entire scheme. Confessions alone weren't always enough in court, especially when made by someone with a criminal past. The prosecution needed evidence that tied Laura directly to the planning, the payments, and the motive for murder. They started with her financial records. A forensic accountant was brought in to trace the flow of cash that had gone unaccounted for over the previous year. The findings were staggering. Laura had withdrawn over $17,000 in total, all in small amounts, typically under $500, and nearly always from ATMs that didn't have security cameras. She had spaced the transactions out over weeks and used 2 different bank accounts to reduce suspicion. The cash had disappeared, with no trace of it ever being used for purchases, bills, or investments. It was clear that the money hadn't been spent through any legal means. Investigators also combed through Laura's online activity. They found encrypted messaging apps on her tablet and discovered that she had signed up for anonymous chat rooms, some of which were associated with individuals offering illegal services. Through data recovery, they uncovered partial message logs. Though many messages were deleted, fragments remained. Phrases like, "make it look like a break-in" and "I'll give you the rest after it's done" appeared in the logs. Time-stamped and linked to Laura's IP address, they helped build a damning timeline. But it was Laura's search history that delivered the most chilling details. In the months leading up to the attack, she had looked up topics like how to stage a burglary, ways to erase phone data remotely, and can a spouse inherit if they're under investigation? The last query stood out to detectives. It was entered just days before the night of the so-called break-in. Meanwhile, they revisited Laura's insurance policies. After James's father passed away the year prior, James had inherited nearly $250,000 and used it to pay off their mortgage. But what Laura had never told him was that she had secretly taken out 2 life insurance policies in his name, one through a private agency and another through a financial institution she used. Combined, they would have paid her over $750,000 in the event of his death. The beneficiary? Laura, solely. The timing of the policies, the payments to Marcus, the search history, and the suspicious cash withdrawals formed the outline of a plan, one that investigators now believed Laura had started crafting months, if not a year, in advance. Detectives continued building their case by interviewing people in Laura's life. Friends, co-workers, and even a few distant relatives. Most said the same thing. She seemed normal, even happy. A bit distant at times, but nothing alarming. However, one co-worker at a local design firm came forward with a disturbing story. She recalled Laura mentioning that her marriage felt like a dead end, that she felt trapped and didn't know how to start fresh. When asked if Laura had ever spoken about leaving James, the co-worker hesitated and said she had. But what struck her most was something Laura said during a lunch break. "Sometimes, I think it would be easier if he just disappeared." It was subtle, maybe even meant as a joke. But now, with the context of what investigators had uncovered, it painted a darker picture. Detectives re-interviewed Marcus Bell in light of the new information. They asked him again how the arrangement began. Marcus admitted that he had responded to a message Laura posted in an anonymous forum. He claimed she presented herself as someone looking for help with a problem, which eventually turned into a series of encrypted conversations. Laura was cautious, never using her real name. But Marcus said she sent a photo at one point, proof that she was who she said she was. That photo was later recovered from his phone and matched Laura's face. He described how she provided detailed instructions on when James would be home, how the house was laid out, and how to avoid the security system. Except she told him there wouldn't be any. That mistake cost her. The hidden garage camera James had installed was the one thing she hadn't accounted for. Marcus said Laura wanted it to look like a robbery gone wrong, that James was simply in the way. She told him to attack her as well, just enough to make it believable, but not to kill her. That detail was key. It explained her minor injuries and why nothing had been stolen. The plan was designed to look random and chaotic, while ultimately ensuring Laura walked away as the grieving widow and sole beneficiary. With the full scope of the conspiracy laid out, detectives secured a warrant for Laura's arrest. She was taken into custody at home without resistance. Her expression was blank, as if she had already accepted what was coming. She asked for a lawyer and refused to speak to detectives. The media picked up the story within hours. A seemingly perfect suburban wife, now accused of plotting her husband's murder. Neighbors were stunned. The couple had always seemed quiet, polite, and unremarkable. Their house was well kept. They hosted barbecues. Laura volunteered at local events. To the outside world, they were just another normal couple. But behind the curtains, a deadly plan had been quietly unfolding. James, now faced with the reality of what had happened, found it difficult to process. He replayed their years together over and over in his mind, the vacations, the holidays, the ordinary moments. He questioned everything, how long she had been pretending, how much of their life had been genuine. There was no closure in learning the truth, only heartbreak. In court, the evidence was overwhelming. The money trail, the digital correspondence, Marcus's testimony, the insurance policies, all pointed to Laura's guilt. Her defense tried to argue that she had been coerced, that Marcus had manipulated her and threatened her into silence. But the facts didn't support that. The planning was too precise, the timeline too long. Laura Whitmore was found guilty on multiple charges: conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, fraud, and obstruction of justice. She was sentenced to 35 years in prison with no chance of parole. For James, justice had been served. But the scars, emotional, mental, and psychological, would last much longer. The woman he had loved had plotted his death with patience and precision. And had it not been for a single hidden camera and a hunch that something wasn't right, she might have succeeded. In the months following the trial, James tried to return to a normal life, but nothing about his world felt normal anymore. The home he had shared with Laura for nearly 8 years now felt hollow, each room a haunting reminder of what had almost happened. He found himself walking through the house in the middle of the night, stopping in doorways, trying to understand how he had missed the signs. How could someone sleep beside him for so long while secretly planning his death? Friends and neighbors offered their sympathy. Some avoided the subject entirely, unsure of what to say. Others were more direct, asking questions James didn't always know how to answer. Had she ever acted strange? Had they been fighting? Had there been money problems? The truth was harder to explain. On the surface, there had been no signs. Laura had gone through the motions, grocery shopping, watching movies, taking care of the house. She laughed at his jokes. She kissed him goodnight. But beneath the surface, something had been brewing quietly, dangerously, and he hadn't seen it coming. The media storm died down eventually, but not before turning James into an unwilling figure of tragedy. Local news ran headlines calling it a marriage built on lies. True crime podcasts picked up the story, dissecting Laura's motives, background, and psychological state. People online speculated about everything, from secret affairs to suppressed resentment. But none of them knew the real answer. James wasn't even sure he did. The only person who could fully explain why it happened was behind bars and hadn't spoken a word to him since the day she was arrested. Laura never wrote. She never apologized. No letter. No phone call. Her silence was perhaps the most painful part of all. It told James everything he needed to know. She had meant for it to happen. There was no mistake, no panic-fueled decision. It was a calculated plan, and if not for one hidden camera and a gut feeling he couldn't shake, she would have gotten away with it. With Laura gone and the legal battles over, James faced another challenge, rebuilding his life. He took a leave of absence from work at first, but the long days at home proved too much to bear. Eventually, he returned to his job in insurance claims. The routine gave him something to hold on to, even if the work felt meaningless at times. It was the small rituals, morning coffee, reviewing policy files, making follow-up calls, that kept his mind occupied. But healing wasn't just about staying busy. James started seeing a therapist at the suggestion of his sister. In their sessions, he slowly began to unpack the trauma he'd buried under facts and news reports. He spoke about the nightmares, the trust issues, the moments when he'd flinch at the sound of a door creaking open. His therapist explained that betrayal of this scale didn't just leave emotional wounds, it shattered a person's entire understanding of reality. James found himself questioning everyone around him, even those closest to him. He wondered if they were hiding something too. If they could turn on him one day, the way Laura did. It wasn't rational, but trauma rarely is. Trust, once broken, takes years to rebuild. Sometimes it never returns the same way. Eventually, James made a difficult decision. He sold the house. The place where Laura had planned his murder, where she had smiled across the dinner table while secretly texting the man she hired to kill him, could no longer be his home. He packed up everything, moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, and started over. A new address, a new routine, a chance, however small, to begin again. Though the world outside seemed to move on, James couldn't escape the lasting impact of what happened. He developed small habits, triple-checking locks, installing new security cameras, avoiding unfamiliar cars on his street. Even everyday things felt different. At restaurants, he preferred to sit facing the door. He kept a flashlight beside his bed. He saved every receipt, every transaction, every calendar reminder, anything that helped him feel in control again. Despite everything, part of him still searched for answers. He often replayed conversations from the past, looking for clues. He reread old texts Laura had sent him, trying to find signs of deception or a shift in tone. He wondered if she had grown to hate him, or if she had never truly loved him to begin with. But those questions had no real answers, only theories, and none of them could change what had already happened. One afternoon, James received a letter in the mail that made his heart stop. It was postmarked from the correctional facility where Laura was serving her sentence. The envelope was thin, the handwriting on the front unmistakable. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a single page. It wasn't an apology. Laura didn't explain her motives or express regret. Instead, she wrote about how she had felt trapped, how her life felt out of her control, how everything she did was for the chance to be free from a marriage she no longer wanted. She claimed that it was never about money, that it was about escaping a life that made her feel invisible. She wrote that the plan spiraled beyond what she intended, but never said she was sorry. James read the letter 3 times. It left him feeling colder than before. It didn't offer closure. If anything, it opened new wounds. Laura's words weren't filled with hatred, but with detachment, as if she had simply removed herself from her own actions, like a stranger describing a bad dream. There was no warmth, no emotion, just distance. He didn't respond. He couldn't. Instead, he tucked the letter away in a box he kept in the back of his closet, along with court transcripts, newspaper clippings, and a printed copy of the security footage that had changed everything. He told himself he wasn't keeping it to hold on to the past. He kept it because he needed a reminder of what he survived, a record of the worst chapter of his life, and proof that he had come out the other side. As the seasons passed, James began to reclaim parts of his life. He reconnected with old friends. He joined a community group focused on supporting survivors of domestic betrayal. Through their stories, he found strength and solidarity. He wasn't alone, even if his pain had once made him feel that way. His journey wasn't linear. There were setbacks, hard days, and quiet nights filled with doubt. But slowly, piece by piece, James built something new. Not the life he once had, but a life he chose for himself. One where trust, though fragile, still had room to grow again. 1 year after Laura's conviction, James stood at the edge of the pier near Clearwater Bay, the same place he and Laura had once visited during better times. The waves lapped against the wood below as the sun dipped low behind the horizon. He hadn't come here to mourn. He came to let go of the memories, the betrayal, and the life that had nearly ended that night. Much had changed since the night of the staged break-in. James had learned that survival wasn't just about making it through a single moment of horror. It was about facing every day afterward with a resilience he didn't know he had. In many ways, his recovery had been more difficult than the attack itself. Physical wounds healed quickly, but the emotional damage lingered, creeping in during moments of silence or unexpected triggers, a familiar scent, a passing face, a whispered phrase that reminded him of her. The trial had concluded with certainty, the evidence irrefutable. The public moved on to newer stories, but for James, the aftermath was a slower unraveling of his former identity. Once a husband, now a survivor. Once a man with a shared future, now someone rebuilding from ruins. At times, he struggled with anger, rage at the woman who had spent years by his side while secretly plotting to end his life. At other times, there was a strange sense of numbness, like everything had happened to someone else. He had learned how grief works in layers. Grief for the marriage he thought he had, for the love he once believed was real, and grief for the man he used to be, trusting, open, unafraid. That version of James no longer existed, but in his place stood someone stronger, sharper, and deeply aware of how quickly life could change without warning. There were days when he wanted answers, real ones. He wanted to know when exactly Laura had made the decision to kill him. Was it after a particular fight, a passing remark, or had she always been capable of it, just waiting for the right moment? But no letter, no therapy session, and no investigation had brought clarity. Some questions, he realized, would never be answered, and chasing those answers would only keep him tethered to a past he no longer wished to carry. After selling the house, James moved to a quieter part of the state. He chose a modest condo overlooking the edge of a nature preserve. The quiet suited him. He began hiking on weekends, discovering hidden trails and listening to the stillness of the woods. It was in these quiet places that he found the space to breathe again, free from the noise of courtrooms, reporters, and whispered speculations. He also started journaling, something a friend had suggested. At first, the pages were filled with bitterness, but over time they transformed into reflections, goals, even hopes. Writing became a way to reframe his story, to shift from victim to survivor, not to erase what happened, but to define himself by how he responded to it. In the spring, James began volunteering with a non-profit organization that helped victims of domestic violence and betrayal-based trauma. He didn't share all the details of his story at first. He simply listened. But as the months passed, he started speaking to small groups, telling them how betrayal doesn't always come with warning signs, and how healing is messy, non-linear, and deeply personal. It was during one of these events that he met a woman named Rachel, a counselor who had worked with survivors for over a decade. She carried her own scars, different, but no less painful. Their conversations began cautiously, often centered around their shared work. But there was something comforting in Rachel's presence. She never pried, never pressed. She simply allowed him to exist without judgment. Over time, a friendship formed, and slowly, something more began to take shape. James didn't rush it. He wasn't sure he ever could again, but Rachel's honesty and patience gave him the courage to trust in small steps. They spent time together without expectations. Coffee, after meetings, walks through the preserve, quiet dinners at local cafes. For the first time in years, James found himself smiling without effort, laughing without guilt. He still had moments where the past crept in. A sudden loud noise, a documentary preview, even the sound of footsteps behind him at night. But Rachel never recoiled from his triggers. She met them with understanding, offering a steady presence instead of empty reassurance. As the anniversary of the attack approached, James considered what to do. Part of him wanted to ignore it, pretend it was just another day. But he knew better. Trauma didn't disappear simply because you refused to look at it. So he chose to confront it on his terms. He planned a solo trip to a remote cabin on the edge of Lake Morgan. He brought only a journal, a few books, and a single framed photo, not of Laura, but of his parents, taken years before they passed. The trip wasn't about escape. It was about acknowledgement. A way to honor the pain without being consumed by it. During that weekend, James sat by the water and wrote a final letter to Laura. He didn't plan to send it. He wouldn't even keep it. But he needed to say what he had never said. To release the weight he had carried for so long. In the letter, he didn't curse her or beg for answers. He simply wrote that he was done letting her define him. That whatever reasons she clung to for her actions were hers alone, and he no longer had room for them in his life. He forgave, not to absolve her, but to free himself from the lingering poison of hate. When he finished, he burned the letter in a small fire pit outside the cabin. He watched the flames consume the paper, turning words into ash, letting the smoke rise into the night sky. Back in town, life moved forward. James continued working, hiking, writing, and volunteering. His friendship with Rachel deepened, though. They kept things slow. He found joy in the ordinary. Morning light through the blinds, the sound of birds outside his window, a warm cup of tea on a cold evening. He knew his story would always be part of him. But it was no longer the whole story. In the end, James didn't seek revenge. He didn't live in bitterness. He chose resilience. He chose to reclaim his life, one quiet, intentional step at a time. What was meant to destroy him had instead revealed a strength he never expected. Not just the strength to survive, but to rebuild, to forgive, and to begin again.